I worry that about the understanding of the total balance of payments position. I think the United States has gotten used to being the world's reserve currency, which meant that they think that whatever we can sell the world will buy, and we're not subject to constraints or that dynamic. So that concerns me a bit. But I think you have, all things considered, a capable and open-minded person who is in a very difficult situation. I think sometimes we think that if we get a good leader, President of the United States or Treasury Secretary or someone, that they can deal with the issues and bring about good results. There are sometimes circumstances that they find themselves in, which the United States is largely in, which is it spends more than it earns, and it finances it with debt by a lot, and it has to sell those bonds, and there are no easy answers to that. And so the position are very difficult circumstances. So when one goes through the mechanics, you could have a very good person in the job, and that doesn't necessarily lead to great results, because the circumstances of the maneuverability is different. And so I give that example. They had to send the checks. If they didn't send the checks, let's look back. If they didn't send those checks, and the Federal Reserve did not provide the support, we would have had a rebellion. We would have had people who needed the money not get it. You have a class warfare issue, and you would have had companies fail. So they had to do that. But as that circumstances meant that they had to produce debt and they had to produce money, so there's a mechanics to that. Now, that set of circumstances will exist, and the world, Republicans and Democrats, will debate 500 billion here or there or something, but the big picture is that situation is ahead of us, and it's politically challenging. The financial factor, the wealth gap and political factor, and the rise of a great power. The last time those things happened were in the 1930s. And if you look at history going back over periods of time before that, hundreds of years, I made a point of studying the last 500 years, you could see these patterns in history. Those are the circumstances that we're facing. And so the issue really, I think, is can we face those things in a skillful way and a bipartisan way so that we don't do ourselves even more harm than the circumstances have brought us as a challenge. What's happened here is repeated repeatedly through history. There are irreconcilable differences, lines that people almost can't compromise. And survey results, something like, I think the statistics are 15% of the Republican surveys and 20% of the Democrat surveys wish members of the other party would die. You have, they don't want to, a large percentage would not want their son or daughter to marry a member of the other party. There are irreconcilable differences, and when they come down, like I said before, if the causes that people are behind are more important than the system's in jeopardy. So it's deep-seated, and there's not a good resolution. So I would say now to carry it to the next, because history has shown if you cross the line too much in their values and so on, you're going to have a civil war of sorts. However, I think it's very difficult. And so when you ask the question of, what should be done, I personally don't care what solutions are reached ideologically, as long as they're done in a bipartisan way that the majority of Americans support, and that if they're done smartly. It's a major issue. Debt is money. When you produce debt, it's an obligation, and you're holding a bond to deliver money, and you have to produce money. and we're producing a lot of it. And if you look at the holdings in the world of bonds and who is holding them, there's less, they're overweighted in bonds, and therefore overweighted in dollars and dollar assets. And and we're going to try to sell a lot more. And that has created a risk for the dollar. The dollar's down about 12% since the actions have taken place. It's an issue. It's important because if you lose your reserve currency status, you lose your exorbitant privilege, really, to get money and borrow it when you need it. So it's a risk. That money can go into an alternative currency, or it can go into alternative assets. Traditionally, all devaluations drive money into stocks, gold, other assets. And so you don't have to just go to another currency in order to escape the bonds. You see devaluations of the dollar in relationship to all financial assets. But it's also coming at a time when China is also opening up its financial markets, and the world is underweighted in its financial markets. It's a viable economic alternative. It's a viable economic competitor. It's developing more capital markets. It's the second most important capital markets. They are opening up. And because the world is overweight in US dollars, the flow into that to rebalance is strengthening the renminbi. And the Chinese have intentionally not developed it because it's somewhat the internationalization of the renminbi. But now there is the internationalization of the renminbi. So to put it in perspective, China is now the largest country in trade, in world trade, exports, imports. It's larger than the United States. It's the largest in the world. And yet virtually none of its transactions are done in its currency, about 2%. There will naturally increasingly be that the internationalization, and it will represent an alternative. And that's why then we have the issues of capital wars. Traditionally, this has happened through cycles. The Dutch and the Dutch guilder, the British and the British pound, the American cycle, and now the Chinese. And as a result of that, we're going to see more of that kind of movement.